I'm picking up where I left off in part two, twin flame soul recognition. So, if you're just recently learning about the twin flame dynamic, I recommend watching part one first. Soul activation. So, when the soul recognizes itself, it's like it's an ocean of gasoline and having a burning match dropped into its center. It's an explosive energy that consumes you. And I believe this happens to both people as twin flames. Then there's the activation. Your soul is ignited like the gas and it's burning fiercely. And just like in nature, it can be destructive. But when it's done burning, it allows for all new growth. That's what's happening in the activation stage that comes with soul recognition. And it's scary and unpredictable, but it's cleansing. And this immense flare up continues, in my opinion, until you're both so called activated, which means you took notice of the things that are being shown to you. And this is where you may also notice what is commonly referred to as mirroring. And that's a good way to look at it, but to me, it's just the shared energy as the one soul. And I talk about that more in both of these videos here if you want to come back and check them out. So, what's happening is that the soul is now aware of itself in the other body. It's aware of the shared energy, which is just the flow of itself through the chakras of each body. And since the soul remains divinely aligned in the 3D, it seeks to balance itself. I think this is why, as humans in general, many tend to believe in a higher power because the soul seeks that balance between spirit and body. And I believe the soul comes to the 3D to experience and express as different levels of consciousness. So to me, this means it can only know what it incarnated with, what it intended when it incarnated, and what it has experienced through its 3D existence in this lifetime thus far. But its soul recognition, it's recognized itself. It's awakened to its truth as a soul. So it's now aware of its divinity as a soul in higher dimensions. It's aware of its existence as consciousness in the 3D. And all of the worldly things we've been taught up to this point are seen as just that worldly, like religion, conditional love, material things. We're now being activated, turned on, awakened. And this can take some time because much of this is subconscious at first. Like my activation started about 24 to 48 hours within soul recognition, but it lasted about 3 months. And I think timing on that varies depending on both people, like how they react to the shared energy that the soul is now aware of. And even to us consciously, in some cases, we're sometimes consciously aware of it, such as those imbalances surface right after soul recognition. We get back into that fear and we can feel it between each other. And no one's to blame. Both feel it, both react. But our soul is getting this live feed now through this awakening. And this may also vary depending on how in balance you were with your intuition or aligned with your soul before soul recognition. But there's a lot of other things happening with activation, how I mentioned in part one from this series, Twin Flame Soul Recognition. Coming down from that high, the energy that came with soul recognition, after we experience this and go back to our daily lives, we may get back into those things that caused us to be imbalanced to begin with. And we slowly or even quickly begin to shift out of that divine energy we were given in the moment of soul recognition. And that intense energy transfers to those imbalances we carry with us, especially the really deep ones, which the soul also recognizes. It's like, oh, I'm in this other body and I can share sensations between them. But it also realizes the imbalances and that those imbalances can hinder the flow of consciousness in each body. So it does something that really, really turns our world upside down. And I'll get to that in a moment. But then, in addition to the soul's recognition of all this, each counterpart eventually realizes that they can't operate in their normal behaviors with each other, which are those imbalances, that wounded energy instead of our divine energy. As a shared soul, it's my belief that the design is for the counterparts to be together in union because, as I mentioned before, it seeks to balance. And as a shared soul, that's what balance is with two bodies involved. Otherwise, if the intent was just to balance the two bodies and they weren't meant to be in union, then it wouldn't be a shared soul. It would be two individualized souls in two bodies. Now, I will say that I don't think union means marriage. That's another worldly concept. But I think it's recognition of the unconditional love for each other within the unique bond that we share, having respect for each other's boundaries. And I think freedom is a part of that too. And in that, once we reach the place we're supposed to be within our journey with each other, which is divinely planned, then union may take on more of a direct physical structure, depending on each individual's circumstances, of course. But I do believe through balancing with our soul, getting to that place of authenticity, of self love, we fully own up to our twin flame being our heart's desire. So, the soul's purpose in the 3D is self love because that's divine love. And everything about our true design, our authenticity, is found in that. So, its intent is to balance. But what actually happens, and here's the kicker that I was talking about a minute ago, where your world gets turned upside down, it drives the two bodies apart. But there are typical stages to this to help us do what is actually for our betterment, even though we don't see it as that, not at first. During activation, we begin experiencing our imbalances in a way we never have before. And I believe it happens to both people. Everything is supercharged for as long as it needs to be and as intensely as it needs to be, meaning both counterparts are basically forced to identify what's causing those imbalances that, the low vibrations such as daily living and low vibrations, addictions, unforgiveness, trauma from relationships, romantic or otherwise. And that's all the activation is for, in my opinion. It's to acknowledge. It's not about healing, not yet. That comes later. For instance, if what I call the masculine intern or MI, if they refuse to acknowledge issues that have existed in their life, like maybe they can't keep a steady job, relying on someone else, but the more they ignore the signs and the feelings in relation to this and even their twin flame, and it might be subtle at first if it's ignored, but it becomes obvious, and the obsessive thinking is very obvious to them too. But often these thoughts don't play well with their lifestyle or their circumstances, their conditioning. But all of this is torture for them. Like, I think the MI actually has it worse than the FI because they have further to go to get out of all the matrix stuff. The deeper they are in the matrix, the more attached they are to their place in society amongst their peers or their material things, wealth and relationships and such. Like, the deeper they are, the more they bury themselves in that because it's their comfort zone for one thing, but also they fear what might change. Like, this is all confusing to them enough as it is, but then add the fear from all that comes from the running and chasing energies. And it's just a huge catastrophe. So they try to go deeper into the matrix. And at first, it feels helpful. And they may think they're getting over this person who they have no idea of the concept. And it's likely neither person knows about twin flames or anything to do with that at first. That's something, at least in the past, and that may be changing as it's more out there now, but it's not usually something that has shown up on their radar. So they can't explain the intense thoughts and feelings, and they don't want to. They just want it to stop because, like I said, this person doesn't fit in with their life. Now, here's where the shared energy really shows us everything. And this is commonly called the running and chasing stage because we see the results of the shared energy as often appearing that way. It looks like they're running and chasing or whatever. Could be a combination of both running, whatever. Check out this video for more explanations. It talks about running and chasing energy if you'd like to know more about that. But it can happen in different ways because it's the energy of fear and it's there in both. Just depending on their conditioning and other factors, though, each has their own unique reaction. An example, I was shown through my twin. He was leaving my house and time slowed. And he suddenly appeared small, like almost the same height as me. And he's almost a foot taller than me. But he had this look of fear on his face. And I had to look at why this happened. And at first, I got that it was how he saw himself and what he felt. But then I identified it as how I felt, which was small and insignificant, often unheard because I wasn't speaking up and other things. Basically, it came down to me not feeling I was worthy of love. I was taught at a young age that if I didn't look a certain way, no one would ever love me. And I believed that almost my whole life. Like when I realized what it was, and I looked back and I saw how that deep wound had affected all of my relationships. But it's that shared energy. Like it may not be the exact same reaction for your twin, but feeling, for example, that they aren't worthy of love or feeling a lack of worth will play out in their life in some form. It's the same energy, just a different reaction. And it may show up like as allowing themselves to only experience superficial relationships, or maybe they try to build a false sense of self-worth by fronting with material things like an expensive car. And there's nothing wrong with having expensive things, but it's the energy behind the having that we're being shown. So we experience a lot of other things in the activation stage, like T knots, which is the dark night of the soul or ego death. But I call it the ego check because we're not meant to completely shut off our ego. It's part of our human design. We're just meant to balance it with our intuition, balance it with our heart and our soul. So, how I mentioned the healing is for later. I think once you acknowledge what you need to make a change with, like myself, it was clear to me that I needed to improve self love. So, once I made that decision to start doing that, I felt the energy change. And it didn't happen all at once, but I noticed the obsessive thinking calmed down pretty quickly as soon as I started doing that. And gradually, I started moving into my spiritual journey. I started meditating, and from there, a lot of other things happened. So, from here, my next video will pick up. And I'm going to talk about reunions and what's happening there. And I want to talk about dreams and signs and synchronicities, astral experiences, even telepathy. So, if you found this helpful, please leave a like and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more. And thanks for joining me.